Hello and welcome to this Meirc free webinar that's titled Training Energizers at Trainers Snoozers. My name is Jimmy Haddad, and I'd like to welcome each and every one of you to this webinar. Now, before I introduce myself, allow me first of all to begin by the title of this webinar, Training Energizers. Now, for those of you who work in the field of training, especially trainers, experienced trainers, and upcoming trainers, I'm sure you might have heard of the word Energizers before. Now, the reason why I chose this title is to try to compare it to some of the alarm systems that we use every day in the morning as we wake up. If you are like me, you probably need a few snoozers before you're actually ready to step out of your bed and begin your productive day. Well, for trainers, there are some snoozers that we need to include in our training sessions. And the reasons why we need snoozers or energizers is to actually keep our participants engaged, energized, and focused throughout the training experience. So the purpose of this webinar is to share with you some basic knowledge about energizers and or snoozers, and to give you some first-hand examples on some of these energizers that I personally have used in the past. So once again, welcome, and let me now begin. To introduce myself briefly, my name is Jimmy Haddad. I'm currently a partner with Meirc Training and Consulting, and my focus is on developing and delivering training courses that focus on human resources and training. I'm a passionate facilitator who enjoys delivering training courses. Now, this passion I obtained many, many years ago when I started my career as a training specialist, and then later on when I became a full-time facilitator, delivering a number of soft skills training programs. Now, with over 10 years of experience, starting in Canada and then moving on to this part of the world, to Dubai more specifically, I hold a master's in educational technology from Concordia University and 2 graduate certificates in leadership and human resources from McGill. I'm currently an active member of the Canadian Society of Training and Development that has now rebranded to become the Institute of Performance and Learning. I'm an HRBP and a SHREM certified professional, a certified training practitioner, and a certified professional in learning and performance. Allow me to also mention that I'm a proud father of 3 children, and I'm a passionate sports fan and a player. I've completed my first marathon back in January of 2017, and there are a number of other races on my radar, hopefully to complete in the years to come. Now, at any time during this webinar, if you have any question, please feel free to type it in the chat box. I'll make sure to keep my eyes on the chat box throughout to make sure that I answer your questions either throughout this webinar or maybe at the end, where I'll also make sure to have some time for a Q&A. Now, to begin, the focus, first of all, when we talk about energizers, is to look at some of the basics, or what are some fundamental understandings of energizers. And here, I'd like to answer 4 main questions: the what, the when, the why, and the how of energizers. Now, to define energizers, it is basically a fun activity that's delivered during any training session as a way or a means of recharging participants' energy and refueling their concentration. Now, I'm sure for many trainers available out there and for many participants that are available, there has been times in training sessions where you have perhaps dozed off, or your energy dropped, or let's face it, you felt a bit sleepy. So the purpose of an energizer is to actually refuel the energy and allow you to be more focused on the content that will be delivered. Now, when to actually deliver an energizer, my recommendation is at any time during a training session. Now, when I say at any time, preferably when the facilitator realizes that the collective energy of participants has dropped. And trust me, on a full day training course, the collective energy of participants might drop many times. My rule of thumb that I would like to share with you is to perhaps consider having one Energizer activity for every hour and a half of a training session. So let me give you an example here. Assume you're delivering a course that starts at 8:30 and ends at 2. Your first session is between 8:30 and 10. That's an hour and a half. Highly recommended to consider an Energizer that you will deliver during that session. You will break for at least 15 to 20 minutes, and then you'll have the second session that will run probably from 10:20 to 12. That's another hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes. Another recommendation to have an Energizer delivered during that time. And perhaps a third session that's after a second break, maybe from 12:45 till 2. Another recommendation to have an Energizer delivered during that third session. So by this example, a course that runs from 8:30 to 2, preferable to have 3 Energizers in the arsenal of any trainer. Now, why do we need Energizers? The purpose is clear. It's to increase the energy and to boost the concentration and focus, allowing for better learning. It has been proven time and time again that when participants have lost focus and concentration and their energy is low, their capacity for gaining new knowledge drops. To prevent that, we need to keep their energies at a high level. Now, how to run an Energizer? Well, in the next few minutes of this webinar, we will explore the how with some examples that I will share with you. Now, it's important to also mention some general guidelines on Energizers. Now, it's very important for every trainer to think, first of all, on what would it take for participants to be energized. We all know that participants in any training session are diverse, and what energizes a group might not necessarily energize another group. So we really need to know, and we really need to be aware and properly assess what energizes different types of participants. Now, in essence, this comes by experience. Seasoned trainers will be better equipped to assess and analyze the needs of their participants and what energizes them. It's very also important as a guideline to consider energizers that include some physical activity, moving around, standing up, activities that require perhaps games, includes riddles, maybe puzzles, things that would really incorporate moving around, and that will boost the energy level of your participants. Energizers often may be unrelated to the topic. And let me give you an example here. You might be delivering a course on leadership, and the energizers that you use may not necessarily have to do with the topic of leadership. When I say may not necessarily, this does not mean that your energizers are not leadership related. They may be, but at the same time, they may not be related to the topic at all. And also important to mention that there is no need to debrief after an energizer. Remember, an energizer is not a review activity, nor is it an icebreaker. It is simply a quick activity to boost the energy level of your participants. Having said that, and as an experienced facilitator, your assessment of participants is key to choosing the right energizers. And when I say your assessment, you have to consider a number of elements. Do think of your participants' age, the average age of the people that are attending your course. Are they between the ages of 35 and 40? Are they more experienced, above the age of 50? Do also consider the gender and the ratio of female versus male participants in your group. Is it a balanced ratio, or there are more females than males in that particular session? Do also consider their collective experiences, the number of years that they have in terms of corporate experience, but also more importantly, experience in training sessions. Do consider their nationalities, their backgrounds. Do consider their engagement level throughout the sessions. Are they really engaged in the training session? Are they active? Are they participating? Are they willing to do things that are slightly different from the traditional one-way lecture type classroom? To also consider their general interests. All of these things combined are ingredients that will allow you to make a better assessment and hence will allow you to either choose or develop an energizer that is more suitable and customized to the needs of your participants. Now, personally, as a facilitator and with over 10 years of training so far, I've always considered developing energizers, but I've also sometimes used some energizers that I have researched from a number of sources. But in general, when we're considering energizers, it's important, and this is one of my recommendations, to develop some sort of a template that includes, first of all, a title of your energizer, that includes the objective or the purpose of delivering the energizer, the timing or the duration, how long will it actually take to deliver the energizer during your session, a section on the materials and the resources that you probably need. And by materials and resources, I'm referring here to things like perhaps post-it notes, printed paper, markers, pens and pencils, any physical material or resource that you would need. And most importantly, there are some clear instructions that have to be provided by the facilitator so that all participants in a given classroom setting would actually understand and will be engaged in doing the Energizer. I personally have developed this template that I'd like to share with each and every one of you. As an Energizer title, I'm sure we've all have watched movies and we've all have paid, cinema tickets to actually go and attend movies in the cinema. And one of the things that really attracts people to go and attend movies is the title of the movie. So really, for us trainers, if we can come up with interesting and attractive Energizer titles, this is the first step in developing and delivering an exciting Energizer. Let me now move on to give you a number of examples of Energizers that I've personally used in the past. Now, before I share with you some of these examples, allow me to warn you and to mention here that some of these Energizers that you will see in the next few minutes, actually the 8 of them, require a paradigm shift in the thinking of facilitators and trainers. And when I say a paradigm shift or a different thinking, some of these Energizers require a level of risk to be taken by facilitators during training sessions. They are outside of the traditional. They include some creative elements. And based on my experience in training, many of these Energizers require facilitators who are comfortable doing things creatively and doing things differently. And the success of any Energizer really depends on the facilitator's ability to animate, direct, and to really present the Energizer in its entirety. Now, my first Energizer, or the first example that I'd like to share with you, is titled Your 3 Favorites. Now, the purpose or the objective of this Energizer is to provide a fun way to share personal favorites of participants. And this should take no longer than 5 minutes. It requires some markers for each table, and it requires some index cards, those same cards that we used to use in libraries as we were looking for the place of certain books on the library shelves. Now, in terms of instructions and ahead of time, you, the facilitator, you need to prepare the index cards with general topics. And here I give a few examples. These topics could be movies, restaurants, sports, books, food items, touristic cities, first names, cars, actors, singers, you name it, anything that you might think of. You will need one topic per person. So if you have, for instance, 8 participants in your classroom, you probably need 8 topics. You need to ask each person to pick an index card, and that they can pick randomly from the bunch of index cards that you have, and share their 3 favorite items from the topic with the other people at their table. So if you have 2 groups of 4 people each, you'll have 4 index cards on each table. Each participant would pick a card, and whatever their topic is, they have to share their 3 favorite cars, their 3 favorite books, their 3 favorite movies, their 3 favorite touristic cities. Now, as you notice, this Energizer may not be related to any of the actual content of your course. But when you feel that the energy is low, a good way to increase the level of energy is to perhaps consider your 3 favorites. Another example is what is called My Compliments. And the objective is to solidify relationships and make everyone feel good about themselves. This will probably take 5 to 10 minutes, and it requires a piece of paper for each participant and a pen for each participant as well. Now, in terms of the instructions that you have to provide, each person writes their name on a paper. So actually inform each person to write their first and last name on a paper, and ask participants to pass their papers to the person on the right. So make sure they all pass the papers in one single direction. That person writes something positive about the person whose name they receive, and emphasize that the words they should write on this paper under the person's name are positive adjectives. Do that for more than one round, and then later on, when participants receive their papers with their names on it back, they will feel great, obviously by reading a few adjectives that others have said about them. Trust me, there's no better feeling than receiving positive compliments from people you are attending a course with. Another Energizer, example number 3, is what is known as forming a line. Again, it's a fun Energizer that gets people moving and competing. Again, it will take 5 to 10 minutes, and this time, no material or resources are required. It's recommended to divide participants into even-numbered teams. So if you have a group of 12 or a group of 18, maybe you may consider dividing them into 3 teams of 6. Spread the teams in the room and ask them to form a line. Now, the trick here is to let them know that you will ask them to rearrange themselves based on your instruction. And here I give a few examples. They can rearrange themselves based on alphabetical order by last name, or the month of birth, or the length of service with the company. Or maybe if you want to get even trickier than this, you can ask them to rearrange themselves by the 3rd letter of their first name. Now, this creates some form of competition, creates some form of excitement, and breaks the routine of long hours of training sessions. Obviously, the team that rearranges themselves first, you ask them to yell "done," and they win a round. Now, as a facilitator, you can choose to run this Energizer for 3 to 5 rounds. Another Energizer that requires some more concentration is what's known as the 1-2 boom. Now, it gets participants standing up, thinking and competing. That will probably take 5 to 10 minutes. No material is required. And in terms of instructions, you need to first of all ask participants to stand up and form a circle. And then you need to ask participants to start counting one after the other. Now, participants whose number is a multiple of 3, which means 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, all of these are multiples of 3, or ends with this 3, like a 3 or a 13 or a 23 must say boom instead of the number. Trust me, in the first couple of rounds, there will be very few people who would actually keep their concentration and yell boom instead of actually yelling their next number. Now, people who fail to do so are disqualified, and the last two are the winners. So you keep on doing this until more and more people get disqualified, until you only have two winners. Now, as facilitators, you'll have to make a decision whether to award and reward winners with perhaps some small gifts that will make them feel happy about their contribution. Another Energizer is what's called Take 5. Now, that's a fun way to take a break from the content and re-energize. You can set aside 5 minutes for it. No specific material is required. As a facilitator, ask participants to form groups of 3, ask groups to stand up, leave the room, go outside the training room, get 3 items from outside, 1 item per participant, and once they return, perhaps you need to assign 2 minutes to go quickly, get an item and come back. And once they return, each item has to be presented with its new use, not how it is normally used. Let me give you an example. If somebody gets a coffee mug from the nearest coffee station, that coffee mug can be presented as a pot for planting. Each participant gets an item, and they have to be creative, imaginative in presenting it in a different way. Now, again, that's a fun activity, and often you'll be surprised at the imagination level of participants and how many objects can be used for plenty of purposes. Example number 6, guess who I am? It gets people moving after some time of concentration. This requires some preparation. You need some sticky notes and markers, and it'll probably take 5 minutes for it to be delivered. Now, when I say guess who I am, the facilitator has to prepare sticky notes by writing names of celebrities. And some categories of celebrities could be athletes, a Messi or a Ronaldo, any famous actor, maybe politicians, on each sticky note. And the sticky note has to be attached on each person's back without them knowing whose celebrity is on their back. Now, ask every participant to circulate and ask yes or no questions to try to guess the celebrity on their sticky note. So the sticky note on my back, I have to guess who that sticky note is, who the celebrity is, but the only way I can guess is by going around the room and asking others in the room yes and no questions. My first yes or no question could be whether the celebrity is an athlete. If I get a yes, then I may proceed to asking whether that athlete is a basketball player or a football player. Now, the person who guesses the celebrity on their back will sit down, and that would be perhaps the winner. That could be done for at least 5 minutes until the energy level has increased in the group. I have a question in the chat box here about perhaps explaining Take 5 again. I will do that at the end of this webinar as soon as I complete my remaining 2 Energizers. Energizer number 7 is called Have You Ever? Now, again, it's a fun way to celebrate and explore the diversity of large groups. And for those who facilitate training sessions, I'm sure you admire and you value the diversity in your respective participants. That will take approximately 5 to 10 minutes. No specific materials or resources are required. And here the facilitator calls out different things and asks participants to stand up if items applies to them and high five others standing up. Now, let me give you some topic suggestions. Facilitator stands, and yells something, travel to London. If anyone in the team has traveled to London, they have to stand up. If two people stand up, they have to come together and high five one another. That can be repeated, where the facilitator will then say something like, people who have visited Dubai parks, or maybe people who have cooked a common dish, or maybe people who have bought an iPhone. So really the facilitator has to prepare a list of topics to encourage participants to stand up, those who have actually done that particular topic, to move around the room and be proud about their what they have done, and actually high five other participants in the team. My final energizer, before I proceed to answering some of the questions in the chat box, is stand up and walk. The objective is to create some chaos and to have fun. Ideal for large groups again. It will probably take 5 minutes, and for this particular energizer, you need a large room for participants to move around. Now, as a facilitator, you ask all participants to stand up and start walking until further instructions. So they all stand up and they all start walking. Now, ask them to secretly select one person. When I say secretly, they don't have to announce the person's name. That person becomes their creditor, or someone who they owe money to. Now, since they owe this person money, they must try not to cross path. So they must try to walk around, but try not to cross path with that creditor. After probably a minute or two, ask them to choose another person, but this time a bodyguard. So now they've chosen a secret creditor and a secret bodyguard. And explain that the goal is to keep the bodyguard between themselves and their creditor, to protect them from the creditor to whom they owe money. Now again, trust me, based on experience, this particular energizer, stand up and walk, would often allow people to change their current mood and will re-energize them as they're standing, moving, and secretly selecting people. Now, I've shared with you 8 examples of energizers that I have personally used in a number of training courses that I delivered throughout my career. It's very important to note here that as I deliver these energizers, I keep in mind the guidelines I've discussed earlier. I assess my group, I assess the differences in gender, I assess the age level, I assess their experiences, I assess their level of engagement before I really decide which one of them is most suitable to be delivered. Now, having said that, allow me now to look at some of the questions that I have received in the chat box. And the first question is related to a question that came from Muhammad, who really asked about explaining Take 5. So Muhammad, let me reopen the slide on Take 5 and let me re-explain that. In Take 5, what you really have to do is, first of all, ask participants to form groups of 3s, highly recommended. Ask them to leave the room, get 3 items, maybe 1 item each from outside the room, any item they can think of, come back to the room and present the item in a different way, not in its original use. So, you know, they can bring, as the example I mentioned here, a coffee mug and present it not as a coffee mug, but as a pot for planting any new plant. They can even get a bottle of water and present it not as a bottle of water, but maybe they can present it as a baseball bat. People will be imaginative, people will be creative, and trust me, you'll be surprised at the various uses of many of the items that people will get. Now, Ahmed has mentioned, why should I leave the room? Now, if I understand well, Ahmed, in take 5, participants are asked to leave the room and not the facilitator. Why should they leave the room? To pick up an item, to break the monotony of a training session, and to do something differently. I have a question from Nisreen, who says, can I start my session with an Energizer? And if yes, should I introduce myself as a facilitator first, or go into the Energizer first and then introduce myself? Interesting question, Nisreen. Now, usually in the arsenal of facilitators, an experienced facilitator would have a bunch of Energizers, but would also have a number of icebreakers and some review activities to use during a training session. So I personally like to divide these into 3: icebreakers, Energizers, and review activities. Normally at the beginning of any training session, one would start with an icebreaker. Now, what's the difference between an icebreaker and an Energizer? An icebreaker is often related to the topic, meaning if one is delivering a course on motivation, the icebreaker has to be related to motivation. That's 1. 2, the purpose of the icebreaker is to include an element where participants get to know each other. So there needs to be a time in the icebreaker where each and every participant in the group gets some information about the colleagues in the group. Things like their name, their interests, their hobbies, the reason why they're attending, information about their education, their experience. And all of these things really are things that you don't see in Energizers. So I highly recommend that you start your training session with an icebreaker. Now, can you start the icebreaker before you actually introduce yourself? Personally, as a facilitator, I like facilitators to do things differently. And that is something that is definitely different. Now, pulling it off or making it successful really depends on your ability to direct the whole experience. If you want my answer, I would say yes, take the risk, do something different. Now, Ahmed is mentioning that I think the time of activities is very short. Now, remember, an Energizer, Ahmed, is designed to be very short, because really the purpose of training is to share information, to share knowledge, to provide skills. These Energizers, their sole purpose is just to reboost the energy. And I'm just thinking of an analogy here of the boosters of car batteries. For batteries that die in cars, usually you boost them with maybe 30 seconds or a minute max, and then you can start your car and go change your battery. And the purpose of these Energizers is to boost the energy and not make it take longer. Otherwise, that will cut away from the learning time of training courses. There's a question here from Mahmoud. Can you share videos for Energizer examples? I have to apologize, Mahmoud. Currently, I don't have any videos available for Energizers, but it's interesting to perhaps look whether there are some sources on YouTube that might show facilitators in action delivering some of these Energizers. Thank you, Rami, for your comment about the last Energizer that I shared. Ahmed, allow me to clarify Energizer number 8 again. Stand up and walk. The idea here is to, first of all, ask all participants to stand up, start walking randomly, and then you ask them, as they're walking, to choose a secret creditor without naming who that creditor is, by just looking at them and thinking that that person will be their creditor. They keep on walking. A minute later, you ask them to choose another person, but this time a bodyguard. And the whole purpose of this is to walk in a way where they will align themselves between the bodyguard and the creditor as a mean to protect them from the creditor to whom they owe money. I hope I this is clearer now to both Ahmad and Muhammad, who had similar questions. I hope I've answered the screen question as well, because Khalid has a similar question. Hopefully stand up and walk is clearer now, even for Majid. In terms of jokes, Muhammad's asking about the jokes Energizers during a session. Muhammad, this is definitely an option, but we have to be careful here about jokes. I'm sure you know friends or maybe family members who think they're funny, but they can never really tell a good joke. I personally always recommend facilitators to use jokes only if they're really good at telling jokes. If they're not, then you know what? Using energizers that require physical activity is a really good alternative. If one is talented in jokes, mind you, they have to be jokes that are extremely, culturally sensitive. It is definitely an option as energizers. One can add riddles as well as a viable option to jokes or physical activity. I hope example number 8 is clear for Walid as well. The videos, once again, I do apologize. I do not have any resources on videos of facilitators, delivering energizers. But you know what? You just gave me an idea. Perhaps in future training sessions, I might videotape some of the energizers that I personally deliver as part of these sessions. Example number 6, allow me to clarify. Guess who I am? What you would need are sticky notes with names of celebrities on them. So a facilitator has to prepare these. Every sticky note would have one name of celebrity. So you'd have a sticky note that has Lionel Messi, another sticky note that would have Brad Pitt, a third sticky note that would have perhaps Roger Federer. And then you would put one sticky note on the back of each person. You ask them to move around. They need to ask yes or no questions to their colleagues in the room. Obviously, the colleagues in the room can peek at the sticky note on their back, and they will tell them the answer, whether being yes or no, until they are able to guess who the celebrity on their back is. Muhammad is saying sometimes it's not appropriate to make energizing, especially when having sessions after a lunch or afternoon. And somehow the moderator is not energized enough to proceed. Muhammad, I definitely agree with you. To really deliver exciting energizers, it has to start with an energized facilitator. That's one. 2, I have to slightly disagree here because often you would need energizers after lunch. That's why personally, I prefer not to conduct training after lunch and try to schedule my training to end before lunch session. Now, this does not happen all the time because of long training days sometimes, but I highly recommend to perhaps incorporate 1 or 2 energizers after lunch in your after lunch session to really boost the energy level, because physically, after lunch, we all know that the blood in our bodies actually go all the way to digest our, the food, and much less is going to our brains. So definitely we need energizers after lunch. Now, the example sheet is simply let's call it a draft or a handout that needs to be used in preparing and developing energizers. Start with the title, include the objective in 1 or 2 sentences, the duration or the timing, whatever materials that you use, and the instructions that you have to say. And for me, I follow this structure in all the energizers. If you can see here, in this particular example, you have an energizer title, you have an objective, you have the timing, you have the material and the resources, and you have the instructions. Highly recommended to follow this particular structure in developing energizers. It will make your life easier when you're ready to deliver them. Ahmed's asking, can I mix certain practices with Energizer? I'm not sure I understand the question, Ahmed. If you want to clarify, please feel free. What if the session is a soft skills training and full of related activity? If the session is full of related activities, and again, you feel that the energy level of your participants has not dropped, then you definitely do not need any additional energizers. Remember, energizers are delivered only when the facilitator assesses that the level of energy, the cumulative level of the group has dropped. Now, if the number of only more than 50, I think some of this activity, we cannot use it. Now, the number of participants in training sessions definitely determines which type of energizer you can use. Now, for me personally, a training session with 50 is really a large group. This will definitely put a lot of barriers and a lot of burden on what a facilitator can do. Highly recommended to really try to divide a session of 50 to 2 smaller groups of 25. That way you have more room for delivering a number of energizers. Now, Omar is asking about plenty of questions that are sometimes asked in sessions. Some of these questions, and here I think if you're talking about lectures, I personally don't prefer to deliver lectures, which sounds more like a one-way. That's why I like to use the word facilitator. And for a facilitator to be successful, we need participants who are energized and willing to participate in activities. Now, Mohsen, definitely you cannot use all the Energizer examples with all kind of participants. I'm going to mention the guidelines that you can see here in front of you on how to choose some of these Energizers. If you look at the box on the right, prior to choosing, you need to consider the average age of your participants, the gender, experiences, nationalities, experiences, interests, their engagement level before you actually decide. Ahmed is asking, can I choose certain participant and use them as a tool or a way of energizing? Ahmed, you have to be careful about this one. You may choose people to assist you in delivering the energizer in case you need help, but choosing someone in the way the question was actually set up, I'm afraid a better alternative should be considered. Now, how can we deal with attendees who refuse doing such activities? It really depends on how you direct and how you introduce these activities. Again, if you feel that your participants are not willing to participate, then you have to be creative in the type of energizers that you deliver. Maybe some of these will not apply to the group that you might be describing. Thank you, Mahmoud, for complimenting Energizers 3 and 4. Technical courses, a question from Muhammad. The technical courses, is it better to use activity which is strongly related to the topic, or use a common activity and find a link between it and the topic, or use the both ways? Now, you mentioned the word activity, and if by activity you mean an energizer, I mentioned earlier that an energizer can be related to the topic, but not necessarily related to the topic. I personally advise you to do both. If you can come up with energizers that are related to the topic, kudos to you. If you can't, you can still use any random energizer. Remember, the energizer is not to provide new information, but just to boost the energy level of participants before giving them important information. Now, Neba's asking, is it okay to begin with an energizer after the breaks, or brief the last sessions first and using? Hiba, it is okay to start with an Energizer. If you feel that the participant energy level is low after the breaks, go ahead and start with an Energizer. How can we make linkage between the Energizers and the session topic? Mahmoud is asking. Well, Mahmoud, it really depends on your topic. And you know, to give you an example here, I once attended a course on motivation, and the facilitator chose to use an example, an Energizer, where he actually bought a curver full of ice, filled it with water, filled it with sand, had a colored hidden ball inside it, and asked for a volunteer to come and pick up the ball. Obviously, no one volunteered. No one wants to, you know, put their hand in this filthy water. So he flashed a bill of $50 from his pocket, and still no one volunteered. $100, and then there were a number of people who volunteered. So this is an example of an Energizer that is linked to a topic on motivation. Dua is asking, how can we engage old people in such activities? Well, experienced individuals might have a tendency not to participate as strongly and vigorously as compared to you know, younger generation. But based on my experience, I have noticed that even though they might be reluctant to participate at first, but if you set the stage early on how you like your sessions to be delivered, meaning if you want your sessions to be engaging, start having engaging activities from the beginning of the session. Slowly but surely, you will realize that even the experienced people in your group will be more than satisfied to participate, because remember, you are delivering your content in a new dynamic way. Mina is asking, the most difficult part is how to create your own activity that is clarifying what you explain. So can you give us some advices on how you think when you create an activity? Mina, thank you for your question. Really creating or designing an Energizer from scratch requires a lot of creativity, and requires also experience, and why not, requires doing research on existing Energizers. Maybe many of the Energizers that are available out there can be customized to your needs. And in this regard, allow me here to thank a lady by the name of Christy Stearns, who has authored a very interesting book called 425 Seriously Fun Ways to Enhance Learning and Make It Stick. It is definitely one of my inspirations for delivering and developing Energizers, icebreakers, and plenty of review activities. Also important to mention to Mina that often you might develop an Energizer that you think will energize your participants. Sometimes you might be surprised that once you deliver it, it will not have the effect you intended. I highly recommend that before you actually deliver it at large, try to test it, maybe with a group of close friends, some colleagues within your organization who would be willing to actually give you some of their feedback on the Energizer that you'd be willing to deliver. Muhammad, I'm not quite sure I understand your question about Energizers in a group of perhaps participants who are not there for the right reasons. Hussam, how many times can we do Energizers? My rule of thumb is maybe once every an hour and a half, or every time you think that the energy level is low. Now, the energy level should not drop more than once in a session of 1 hour and a half. If it does, then one should question his current style of delivery. Maybe he or she are lecturing more than they're supposed to. I totally agree with Nasreen in terms of creating your own Energizers. And the age, according to Ahmed, of participants is very challenging. It is. These are some interesting challenges that we facilitators deal with in training courses. Muhammad is asking, which age or generation can we play this package of activities with them? Muhammad, if I were to give you a direct answer, I would say these activities would work with age groups that are anywhere between 20 to 50, 30 years of age range. That's a complete generation. I've used them with groups of participants around these ages, and they worked well for me. Mind you, it all depends on how you direct and how you provide the instructions. Carlos, I'm not quite sure, Nabil, if I understand your question, please feel free to rewrite it. I agree with Usam Salah in terms of providing rewards for the winner to motivate the participants. That would definitely boost participation in future activities. Allow me here to perhaps type the title of the book that I mentioned, and maybe Reem, you can view the title that will appear shortly. It's called 425 Seriously Fun Ways to Enhance Learning and Make It Stick by Christy Stearns. Obviously, there are plenty of other resources available out there. Ahmed's mentioning whether is it professional to reward all participants after the activity. Obviously, often rewards are distributed to those who have actually participated well, competed well, finished first. But you know what? Participants do enjoy getting some sort of a reward or a gift, something as small as a maybe a cookie, to a piece of candy, to a book, a pen, you name it. Now, Omar has asked an interesting question about those who refuse to participate in some activities. Now, again, an experienced facilitator would be able to determine those who are willing to participate and those who are not willing to participate. With experience, your assessment will improve. And obviously, for those who are not willing to participate, those are usually, their will fluctuates. I've never had people who are not willing to participate in any activity. This has never happened, perhaps because of me wanting to set the tone of an engaging training session from the beginning. Day one, first half an hour. Nasreen, please feel free to get in touch with me. You've mentioned if I want to develop my own energizers, how could I reach your opinion about if it's possible with you? I will leave you here with my email address that I'm currently typing. Please feel free to contact me by email, share with me your energizer, and I'll be more than happy to give you my opinion. Rami has mentioned, do you recommend any other books? To be honest with you, Rami, I have honestly a library of books on these topics. Do send me an email. I'll be more than happy to share with you some other titles as well, and some other authors. Thank you, Mahmoud, for the link. I'll definitely look at the perhaps the video that is there. I can't comment on the link, to be honest, right now. I haven't seen the videos. A question here from, just a second, a question here from Muhammad Subhi. If there is one or more of the participants has a rowdy behavior or a troublemaker or interrupting the session many times, do you recommend Energizers as a means to get them involved positively in the session, or it would give a vice versa effect? Well, for that particular person that you are describing, I would probably have a side conversation with them at one of the breaks. If they are really disturbing the other participants, if they're really behaving in the way that you've described, I would probably need a one-on-one conversation with them. Now, this does not mean that those particular individuals will not be willing to participate in Energizers. Now, many participants, and the way you deal with participants is very, very, very situational. And for those who have been facilitating training for a while, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. You will see plenty of types of participants, but each will have a different way of dealing with. Marian Brahim is asking about motivating participants from 40 to 50, with the perhaps facilitator being younger than them. It's definitely a challenge, but you know what? I have personally delivered plenty of training programs where the average age of participants have been much higher than my age. To be honest with you, I haven't had any problems. And I repeat to say, the reason for that is because I set the stage early. From the beginning of the session, I would have an interesting icebreaker to start with, and I'll be sending a message that this is not a lecture. I'm not here to, talk for the entire 3 days or 2 days or 5 days. On the contrary, the success of the program depends on their participation. So even if they are an age group of 40 to 50, they will receive the message from the beginning that this program requires their active participation. Thank you all. I really appreciate your comments and your thank you messages. In terms of saving the presentation, to get back to it, each and every one of you who have actually registered and attended this webinar, which I see here the number is 75 of you, will actually receive the slides by email. When you registered, you've provided your email addresses, and we'll make sure to send you the slides for your reference by email. Muhammad is asking whether the content of the lecture can be converted into videos and the work of the questions on each part. Muhammad, I'm not clear about your question. Please send me an email about what you really meant, and I'll be more than happy to answer that. In technical training, Ahmed is asking, the course made for 7 days with the different trainers. In this case, it would be helpful to use the same Energizer that has the beep used by another trainers days before. Now, again, Ahmed, using the same Energizer more than once would perhaps lose the energy effect of that particular Energizer. There are plenty of Energizers out there, and I'm sure you have plenty of creativity to come up with plenty of Energizers throughout the 7-day technical course. At this note, Nabil, let me, I mean that discussing a different subject than the training subject itself, if that would be a good idea. I mentioned that Energizers are not related to the actual topics, may not be related to the actual topics, and it is fine for you to deliver an Energizer that is outside of the topic. Remember, it's only 5 minutes, 10 minutes max, and the purpose is to boost the energy. Again, thank you all for your active participation. On this note, and before I end, I just want to mention that we at Meirc Training and Consulting, we have 2 courses that we deliver that target facilitators and trainers. One is called Train the Trainer, from design to delivery, and the other is called Certified Master Trainer. I encourage you to go to meirc.com and look at the learning objectives and the outline of these courses. Definitely there you'll also see the dates in which the courses are scheduled to be delivered. I'm always available for any additional clarifications or questions. I have typed my email, and I'll do that again. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to email me at jhaddad@meirc.com. We can definitely continue this conversation after the webinar. Thank you all for your active participation. I enjoyed delivering this webinar and hope to see you on future learning opportunities. Have a good day and talk soon.
meirc.com.